Gadem Šimron, bývalý agent Mosadu, spisovatel. Narodil se v roce 1950 v Tel Avivu a po studiích historie začal pracovat pro izraelský veřejnoprávní rozhlas. V 70. letech ho do svých řad zverbovala izraelská tajná služba Mosad. 10 let se podílel na jejich operacích v nejrůznějších koutech světa. Co je na práci agenta nejtěžší? Jak probíhá verbování do tajných služeb a jak se liší práce agenta v době nových technologií a dronů od let 70. Hostem dnešního Spotlightu je Gadem Šimron. Welcome.
Thank you for having
to Spotlight. What led you to the decision of becoming a secret agent?
Well, you know, like everything in life, it's revolving doors, just by chance. You know, one day you find yourself being approached by somebody, asking you questions, then you make all kind of exams and checkups, etc. And one day you find yourself from a nerd to a spy with permission to do all kind of things that normal people only dream of doing, you know, like stealing and observing and beating and hitting and sometimes even more than that.
Stealing and beating?
Whatever, you know, breaking in, okay, to somebody's place and taking pictures of his secrets. I mean, if you do it on your own personal level, you are a criminal. If you have the state behind you, you are a hero.
A hero.
That's the difference.
You, though, started your career as a journalist. Wasn't it a little bit against the morals of this profession to become another profession? And did you mix it?
Well, Teresa, you know, actually there is not much difference between being a good journalist and a good spy. Because your aim is to gather information and pass it to somebody else, you know, in the case of journalists, to the public, in the case of an agent, to the decision makers, so they can make the right decisions. So if you are a good journalist and you are getting the true facts and bringing it up to your readers, you are doing, if you want, kind of an agent work, because the same thing here. The problem is that, unfortunately, you know, you have bad journalists, you have bad spies, and it's not always, you not always bring the right information. But yes, I did both of them, never at the same time. I mean, when I was a journalist, I was a journalist. When I was a spy, I was a spy. My bosses knew it. I mean, my bosses at the Mosad knew that I don't mix the two things. And therefore, I think I had a very interesting life.
I guess for your, as you say, for your bosses in Mosad, it must have been an issue as well, right? Because having a journalist in the midst of a secret agency is probably not something one would dream of, being the boss of the spy agency, right?
Well, I would like to be modest and give you an answer that I really don't know what went through their heads when they called me up again and again for reserve duty after I left the Mossad. I guess I was a good, you know, I was doing well my job as a spy. And for example, I remember in the mid-80s when there was one of those operations, which we maybe will talk about it later, when we established a diving school on the Red Sea in Sudan in order to help Ethiopian Jews who ran away into Sudan to smuggle them to Israel. I remember I was on reserve duty and I was called up a few times to help this operation. And so in the morning I would sit in the foreign affairs desk of the newspaper, and in the evening I would go to the airport and board a plane and land somewhere in Europe, change identities, go down to Sudan, work there for 3-4 weeks, go back to Europe, change identity again, come back to Israel, go back to work at the desk, and read a report by Reuters or AP or any other news agency, something about an activity in Sudan, and then I realized how usually journalists have no idea what is really going on. Nothing to do with reality.
Well, it sounds really like a film script more than a real life. But on the other hand, being a journalist, to be honest, I don't like it that much because it just feels like a betrayal of journalist profession.
Again, I would say, first of all, Mosad never uses journalists as a cover story. Because they say, no, journalists have very bad reputation
because then
all over.
It would become like all journalists could
so
be a
never.
target.
I mean, in the 50s, I know that Western intelligence agencies did use journalists as cover story. In the Mossad, from the beginning, they said, no, it's a bad idea because it endangers the real journalists. But again, I mean, I remember there were times that I was working in Ma'ariv, for example, and a story would break out with big headlines and everybody was looking was there, and I was laughing because I knew the inside story. And one day the editor-in-chief, after such an incident, which later I told him, I knew the story, but I didn't tell you because it was for my other job, he said, God, you are an idiot. And I asked why. He said, you could make such a career from telling what you know. Why you do that? I said, well, it's kind of schizophrenia, and I don't say I enjoy it, but it makes life more interesting.
And the editor-in-chief didn't mind when he found out that you are actually being, you have this other job?
No, at the time I didn't have the other job, but I had still inside information. There was a very famous case where everybody was looking, who is this guy, what's going on, and he asked me when it started coming up, do you know this guy? And I said, no, I have no idea. And later, 2 weeks later, when the whole part of the story came up, and he said, okay, now we know. What can you tell me about this guy? I told him, what do you want to know? I can give you background as much as you want and details nobody else will give you, but understand that at the time when it was still secret, I couldn't speak. So he said, you are an idiot, and I tend to agree.
How does the recruitment look like? I mean, you probably don't find an ad in a newspaper which you answer.
Well, in those days, today, by the way, it's all done through internet. You have advertisement. Are you looking for an interesting job, unusual job? If you have the capability, if you have the abilities, we'll be happy to see if you fit in. Today, everything is done by on the net.
So it's an official.
Today, everything is done on the net. In those days, it was more the system of a friend brings a friend, you know, because we are talking about what, 70s, early 70s. And actually what happened with me is that one day, it was after the Yom Kippur War, I was working in Kol Israel, which was the public radio station, a young student, just married. And one evening there was a knock on the door and a guy came up. I knew him vaguely. I remembered he was married to a girl from my neighborhood, but I didn't know him personally. And he started asking all kinds of questions, and it took me a few minutes to understand which, I mean, I thought he's asking me about the Shabak. Shabak is the Israeli internal service, like FBI. Mossad is like CIA. And I said, okay, interesting, etc. And at the time I was actually, he came in, and it's a matter of luck. At that time I was wondering whether I want to continue to work for the public radio. And I also was trying to get into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I made all the exams, I was accepted, but I decided not to go there. And he knocks on the door, you know, luck. And so after about 2 or 3 months, I found myself doing a long series of exams and checks and psychological and physical, etc., etc. And after a while, I found myself in a very, you know, I think out of 1,000 candidates, something like 20 were accepted. And after a year, we found ourselves in the graduation party where there were more instructors around the table than graduates. I mean, we were 6 who graduated. It was a very tough year, very interesting, and I officially became a spy.
Did your family know about it?
My wife at the time, of course, she was part of it. Wives are always you are permitted to tell your wife what you are doing, up to a certain extent, of course, not to go into details. But Yes, she knew. My family at the beginning, I remember when I wrote the book about the Sudan operation many, many years after, I wrote a dedication to my mother. Dear mother, now you know where I disappeared and why I disappeared for a couple of months in 1982 and 1983. So my brother knew, I think my mother guessed, but they didn't know for sure.
I think that you are talking about the case which you later described in a book called Red Sea Diving Resort. In Czech language, it was Exodus by Mosad. Maybe can you explain briefly what was going on and what did you have to do? Because for a Czech radio a couple of years ago, you said, I remember almost every minute of that operation because it was so incredibly different and unique.
It is, because I came to this operation you're talking about from what we call the operative unit. Operative unit is a unit that's doing what you see in James Bond films, okay? Chasing, breaking in, all those real James Bond work. And I was recruited for this Sudan operation because in the early 80s, there was a group of black Jews in Ethiopia, which for many years were not considered to be Jews. I mean, they were regarded as a kind of an exotic tribe living in Africa, having maybe some basic knowledge of Judaism, but nobody really thought they are Jews. And then, for various reasons, more details were known, and it was decided by the chief rabbi of Israel at the time that they are Jews. And if you are a Jew, according to the laws of Israel, you are entitled to come to the country and become a citizen. And as it happened at the same time, there started a civil war in Ethiopia, and many of those Ethiopian Jews were persecuted. And they ran to Sudan, a neighboring country, which is an Arab country, a hostile country to Israel. And from there, they asked, please help us come to Israel. And the funny thing is that one of the special things about Israel, that its secret agency is also responsible for doing such rescue operations. Because, Teresa, if, let's say, the British Prime Minister calls the chief of the MI6 and tells him, there are 30,000 Brits stranded in Bali, something like this. Bring them back to Great Britain. He would look at him and say, Mr. Prime Minister, that's not my job. Ask the Red Cross, ask somebody else.
Exactly. One would say, why don't you just send a plane or a boat?
Okay, because here was the dilemma. There were Jews in an Arab country wanting to come to Israel. How do you take them out?
Send a boat.
And it was, Sudan at the time, the Murphy Law, if anything has to go wrong, it will. Sudan is the Murphy Law of Africa. It was at the time one of the poorest countries in Africa, dictatorship, very difficult to operate, of course, with a lot of limitations on the free movement of people, especially refugees. And so the Mossad decided to bring them out. We looked for different ways. I'm not going to elaborate because it will take the whole day.
Exactly.
But at the end, it was decided that if we want to bring out big numbers, it has to be something special. Now, I think one of the main strong points of the Mossad is that even if you are a junior officer and there is a discussion at the table how to do something, and you raise your finger and say, well, I have an idea, and it's a crazy idea. The bosses will look at you and say, okay, what is the idea? And if it's a good idea, they will accept it. What I call an open box. Mm-hmm. Think out of the box. And here it was decided that the best way to bring them out is actually to lease an abandoned diving resort on the Red Sea. We leased it from the Sudanese government, undercover, of course. They thought that we are a Swiss company or something like this that wants to develop diving and tourism in the Red Sea. And this enabled us to move around freely in Sudan and organize convoys where we came at night. We picked up 200, 300 Jews, put them on trucks, 400, 600, 700 kilometers through roadblocks and everything to the shore. And from there we met with the units of the Israeli Navy SEALs, on a ship, Israeli ship that was going around under foreign flag, of course, and to Israel. After a while we had a clash with the local army. I'm not going to elaborate, it deserves another movie. We started with aerial operations. We landed in the middle of the desert. I mean, when you think of it, it's really a James Bond movie. In the middle of a hostile Arab desert, we landed Israeli Air Force cargo airplanes, 300 people in the airplane, and to Israel. And this diving village gave us the cover, the necessary cover to operate. And the funny thing, it also operated as a real diving resort, and there were times it made money, which caused another problem for the Mossad. Most cover companies lose money, you know, and this one was making money. And how do you explain to the representative of the Ministry of Finance that all of a sudden there's a surplus of $50,000 somewhere in Africa? It was a funny story, and I remember every minute, not only myself, everybody who took part of this operation. First of all, because it's kind of a Zionist James Bond operation. And it's the only case in African history, I think, that white people took out Africans out of Africa in order to liberate them, not to enslave them. And it was really, you know, I was used to the usual dirty intelligence work, and all of a sudden we were doing something so positive, life-saving. You know, I'll tell you an anecdote. A few years ago, I was in Ethiopia on a tour. And in the airport, I met a group of young Israeli Ethiopian girls who came to Ethiopia to see where the parents came from, kind of, you know, roots mission. And there was a girl, I mean, they looked like Israel, you know, T-shirts, jeans, iPhones, sneakers. And I asked one of them, tell me, I mean, you went to the village of your grandfathers, etc. Do you think this whole operation and the suffering, because they suffered a lot on the way to Sudan, and in the refugee camps of Sudan, those Jews had terrible time. I mean, they are the real heroes of the story. And I asked her, do you think it was worth it? She looked at me and said, are you crazy? She said, I'm going to start medicine studies, medical school next week. And girls my age in the village of my grandfathers go every day to the river to bring water on their head. And you ask me if it was worth it. So, you know, I mean, when you're part of something like this, you must feel better.
You mentioned James Bond a couple of times. How close are the movies to the reality of a secret spy agent?
Nothing. First of all, every story ends in 90 minutes. In real field work, if there's one thing you really have to be, is be patient, you know, because very often most of the work is waiting. You wait for somebody, you wait for something to happen, a lot of observation. It doesn't end in 90 minutes. This is number one. Number two, there's very little shooting in real intelligence work because, I mean, you have to work. You don't kill each other. Of course, I can understand why people love spy stories. I think it all begins like everything from the Bible. If you remember, the first sentence in the Bible is that first God created this and this and this and this, and then he said, let it be light, and there was light. And the spying work is done in the darkness. And people love to know what's going on in the darkness. And that's one of the reasons why spy stories are so exciting.
Is there an ability which an agent must have, and on the contrary, which is an absolutely no-go zone if you have some personality trait which simply disqualifies you from becoming?
I think people don't realize that you can take almost everybody, even from this studio, and make him a spy. It's a matter of how much resource and how much money and how much energy you're willing to invest in making him a good spy.